another week of Locally Sourced. I am Carter Hammond, the host and producer and all-around solo dude that makes this happen and, doing my thing. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. We had, a little bit of a lull last week, which is fine. Got to get it together sometimes. Wanted to get a bunch more planning done. Obviously, if you can take a moment to subscribe to our Patreon, and you can support the channel, subscribe to the YouTube, hit the little bell for notifications, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, all that good stuff. Today, super exciting, as always, consistently excited to be able to host progressive candidates who are out here just absolutely killing it. And today I've got Marcella Termini from Manchester. She's running in wards 4, 5, 6, and 7, District 43. And Marcella, welcome. How are you today?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, this is an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I feel like you have the ability to speak on a number of issues that folks don't necessarily understand quite as much without, it's something that it's hard to grapple without some sort of immediate exposure to lived experience. And I just, so I think that's a really cool thing. So just first off, again, how are you? You doing okay through all this COVID stuff?
For me, I've always been kind of a home person. As a teenager, I think I spent 99% of the time in my room. So this is kind of I always tell my kids, oh my God, if this had happened when I was in school, this would have been so awesome.
Right.
I wouldn't have had to go in and do all of that back and forth. So yeah, not great because of, there's a lot of other mental health issues that are coming out of this, and I'm seeing some people really struggle.
Yeah.
But again, on a personal level, for me, it's not been, knock on wood, it's been pretty good.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we all have, I knew from the outset that we were all going to have very, very viscerally different reactions to the lock-in. I personally did okay with it because, again, I'm like you. I spent a lot of my time inside, just messing around with computers or video games or whatever. But I knew I was going to be okay with it, but I definitely knew that there were a lot of people sort of in my orbit that were going to have a super hard time. Really extroverted folks that go out to the bar a lot, and it's this is going to be really hard for them. So good. I'm glad to hear that things are holding up well for you. So I guess just to sort of dive right into it, your website lists disability rights, access to quality education, healthcare, childcare, wages, and paid family and medical leave for all citizens as issues that you're focused on first and foremost. And I get the sense from this particular collection of issues that there's an interrelated nature of them for you. Would you say that's the case? And if so, can you just sort of elaborate on how those issues are connected for you and in what ways they, maybe not just for you, but for everybody, how they work together?
Yeah. So that it's really the basis of why I want to run for this position as state rep. Because for me and my family, let's just start off with basics, healthcare, access to healthcare. I had twins, they were born, we didn't have any sort of paid family medical leave. So my husband took the paid family medical leave program through his work, and he ended up being boosted down in his position because he was out for almost a month. Because it takes a lot when you have twins. So going forward with that, I was not able to go back to work. I was working as a hairdresser. Definitely couldn't afford to pay childcare on, sub minimum wage with a couple of tips based on where I was working. So childcare was not an option. That's something that I also just, putting it out there. It's not cheap for anybody, especially when you have more than one kid. So I became a stay-at-home mom, and that kind of turns into what happened next was I noticed around age 2 that my kids were not speaking as much as they had been in prior years. We went through early intervention services, not because our doctor said, hey, you're right, you're seeing these things, something's wrong, but because I had a family member who knew about it and said, you need to contact your area agency who is set up to work with early supports and services for kids who are developmentally delayed. So there's that. I didn't know about it. I didn't know what it was. My kids were diagnosed with autism about 3 months after we started those services. And I didn't know what that was really, besides like the stuff you see in the media. So, not knowing what you don't know, it's great. It's something that we can say. And it worked out for me. Like, I didn't know that there was a such thing as early intervention or early supports and services for kids with autism. What about all the other families in Manchester who don't know and they never know? That's just, I don't know, it keeps me up at night that we have a lot of services that could be available to people and we're just not even getting that information to them. So going forward, while my kids were diagnosed with autism, I became pregnant with my daughter. And because of the issue prior to when the twins were born, with my husband taking leave and not having any sort of paid family medical leave program in place anywhere, he was able to take the day my daughter was born. I had a scheduled C-section, so basically we timed it so that I could have her on a Friday and he could go back to work on Monday when we returned home, which is an issue. I had twins at home with autism, recovering from surgery. My mom had taken time off to watch the kids while I was in the hospital. She couldn't take any more time off when we came home. It was just tough. And I made it work, but I don't think that that's something that people should have to do. I actually, there's a lot of trauma involved in that. And so from there, my kids go to school and I have to go through pretty much alone because my husband is, again, our breadwinner, so he came to as many things as he could, but I was left to navigate the special education system through the public schools, which, disclaimer, I love our public schools. My husband's a public school teacher. It's really tough, though, as a parent of a kid with kids with disabilities to navigate this system. And it's hard. And again, a lot of trauma faced in that. So that's how this all ties together for me is
Sure.
I pull all those things from my own personal experience to then, kind of turn the mirror around and be like, what about all the people out here who don't have what I have to make it work?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I'm really glad that you explained it through that sort of personal narrative context, because I feel like that's oftentimes what gets left out when we're trying to communicate to folks how to understand why, like, in a lot of ways I feel as though it's the argument for progressive politics inherently. The idea for a holistic community-based solution that addresses problems as a whole and sees the relationship between them. So the idea that there's this thread between healthcare and childcare and education, that there's consistency uh, with the issues that you experience, especially within the context of people who experience disability. Um, because it's like, I always try to think about it in the inverse, where what if as wherever I certainly don't know where I fall within a spectrum of things. I've never been exposed to it or tested for it, so I have no clue. But if I were to say take the assumption that I fall into a neurotypical category, I try to, whether right or wrong, do a mental experiment where I assume that the neurotypical mind is the one that's not working correctly. And the sort of the neurodiverse mind is the one that is working correctly. And when I shift that, I start to look at the issues in a different way. And I think that's what progressive candidates and activists mean when they say empathy. It's like, if we take a moment to step into the true mindset of like, what if this position is the more correct position? What if I relinquish my attachment to my preconceived understanding of how things are or how things are supposed to be, and assume for a moment that this is actually the baseline? What changes can we make that will better accommodate? Do you feel like that's sort of an underlying logic that you would relate to the way you understand arguing for solving the issues that are connected? I know that's a really long like sentence, but
Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like relating how and why these policies should work, and you can just relate it to what people are going through, and especially like from a neurodiverse family, meaning that we have autism, ADHD, bipolar, all of those things kind of floating around up here for
mhm.
everybody. It just, if we can make a system that works for all of these people who are really trying hard to navigate the world and navigate healthcare. How do you navigate healthcare when you can't get a diagnosis for something that you could potentially get some supports and services for? We
Right.
need to look at it from our side, from that kind of a view, because if we can help the people who need the help the most, it's going to help everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just, for me, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
and
So
it's definitely about looking at that material solution too. Like, it's not enough to say, okay, we understand the issue. You like, there's the concept of, okay, how do you follow through on this? And something that I like about the way you talk about this stuff is you definitely go after the meaningful nuts and bolts. How do we get from point A to point B sections of the issue, which it is, I feel like people who spend a lot of time on the internet and in the internet political sphere don't necessarily always connect directly to what you have to do to make something happen, and like there's a disconnection from the actual process of legislation. But I like that the way you talk about these issues, you tend to try and approach it from like, actually, okay, what do I have to do when I go in to, you know, get assistance? What's the actual formal process that's causing roadblocks that prevents widespread information programs to help folks understand how to get services, stuff like that. That seems to be a really um, upfront part of the way that you're approaching this. Would you say that's true? Is
yeah, yeah. Actually, wow, that's awesome. You nailed it. That's really how I don't like to do anything just kind of like, okay, I'm going to go into this and I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I knew a way to better these systems. And I'm super like, everything has to be done this first, then this, then this. So the way I look at it is like, if we start here, with healthcare at birth, and we work on all of those things that I mentioned as we go, but I don't know, if we take a sample of the people, just a huge sample of people, and take their experiences and kind of build from there, how are we going to make these systems work? Like, what have they gone through? What would have been helpful?
Right.
I just feel like it's, to me, and maybe way out here, but that is the best way to approach getting changes made. If we can, you use solid life experience to make change that's going to help somebody.
Right, exactly. Well, and I think the thing is, it to me, it strikes me as like a numbers question, right? Like a lot of the way that legislative problems like generally I would say I see being solved, it's like, okay, well, here's this data that came from the Brookings Institute, or here's this data that was done by this or that think tank or this or that government agency, and we're gonna look at medians, and we're gonna like all this stuff, and then we base policy off of those medians. And it sounds like, and again, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing here, but it sounds like what you're suggesting is, rather than looking at maybe starting with that, maybe what we instead start with is the human experience of people that are going through it, and then listen to the stories, and then actually like take into account that subjective experience, but understand it in a way that's like, yeah, more related to people. I guess is the best way to put it, like actually incorporating the experience of the voter or the citizen or the individual.
Yeah. I feel like, so I guess to more explain, going further on what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming to this from an advocate position,
Yeah.
and also from somebody who, I spent a lot of time last year at the State House just telling my paid family medical leave story.
Yeah.
Just telling I took my son actually to getting the medical for Medicare, I'm sorry, the dental benefit for adults with Medicaid in New Hampshire, telling our story about why dental care and preventive dental care is important. So in my head, I'm like, okay, we have all these people telling these great stories during hearings, and it's great. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Can we take something from that, and will that be used to help with the bills that we're talking about and the legislation?
Right.
So I feel like making, the people who are electing us, making their stories and their concerns and their struggles the priority. To me, that just seems like that's what it should be. And then using numbers to get you funding and things like
Right.
that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, let me ask you something more, just directly. I mean, like, what do you feel like the value of just straight listening is in as a candidate? What's the balance between listening to folks versus like just standing there and hearing stories versus being an orator and pushing for a policy? Like, where's that space for you between, I'm going to take things in and absorb information, as compared to, I'm going to explain information that I understand in a way to try and get people to relate to it? Like, how do you, where's that balance for you?
For me, I struggle with that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be a listener, and I can listen all day if
Mm-hmm.
somebody has something to say. Um, so what I feel, where I'm at right now, I'm like, we'll say 65% listen, and then the rest of it would be, getting my information out.
Yeah.
I struggle sometimes with finding the right word. I have a lot of words in my head that I want to use, and it's hard to get them all out. Little side note, personal note, if you see me like, it's because I'm trying to find the right one that, doesn't make me sound like a jerk.
Right. Yeah. 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 I totally feel
So,
you.
yeah, so I definitely, I feel like there's so much value in being able to listen and then explain what you just heard to somebody and make it understandable. I've been told that when I write too high, like I'm kind of explaining things on a level that people are like, not sure what that means.
Sure.
So I work constantly to figure out like, where's the balance? Where can I make this understandable? So if I start rattling off, I don't know, disability rights organizations by their acronyms, like, okay, slow down, turn this into something that people can understand.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think that's good personally. Um, I mean, it's, I think it's actually refreshing to hear that your ratio is more listening than it is like pushing things out. I think that's something that doesn't happen enough. If there's not enough listening that happens, especially on the left. As much as I love, like, look, I love the comrades. Don't get me wrong, but I think something we have a really hard time with is actually setting aside those moments to really listen and understand and try and find a way to relate and empathize to a different experience. And I think this goes to a question that I have about sort of like, when actually in the state house, do you feel like when approaching trying to write legislation or do anything of that nature, really like getting into the work, like let's say you're already there, do you think it's going to be too much of a challenge to try and do that holistic type of a thing where it sort of risks that like omnibus type of a confrontation where there's all this weird political hemming and hawing over specific provisions in a bill? Or do you think it's going to have to occur in a more parsed out, compartmentalized way?
So I'd love for it to be something that is more holistic, something that we could say, all right, we're going to tackle this, because nothing can really change if we only change one thing. I know how things work though. So I think it's going to be something that I would need to really be able to explain why to my fellow proposed state house rep folks, just to talk about why it might be a good idea to do, blending some sort of childcare and early intervention service together, and make it not sound like, hey, you're just trying to get everything into one, but explaining it and being able to show like why this is important to have these two things together.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question fully.
No, it's I guess like it does kind of. And I think the thing about it is I'm always interested in this question because I feel like it gets to a broader question that folks within the progressive left need to kind of, I always worry when I have conversations with folks that they think I'm too involved in the theory of everything and not focused on that mechanical process. And I think realistically for me, the thing is like, well, you gotta think about it simultaneously. You gotta kind of do it all at once. And for me, I think about asking this question in terms of understanding, like you said, like, I know how it works, right? And it's like, okay, so we have to hold two truths. We have to hold, this is how it works on the one hand, and it sucks. And it means that we're sort of like, to a certain extent, we're stuck with incremental change, which can be really aggravating to people that are on the the further left, that that would not fall into any kind of centrist category. That's like really frustrating, because you're like, hey, the world's gonna burn in 30 years. We're all gonna die. Like, this matters. And so it's like, it's holding that other truth with the, yeah, we're stuck with incrementalism. Like, we need to do something right now, but we also need to deal with where we're at. And in the interests of that sort of A to B, what's the, like, I understand the A and I understand the B, but what's the line that connects them? And so I always am curious to ask people who are running for positions, what's the way in which, like, what would be your mindset talking to other politicians up at the state house when trying to convince them away from, like, trying to sell them on going after the holistic solution versus working with that incrementalism? And it's sort of like, it's the question in a lot of ways of, how do we pull the Overton window to the left? Like, it's not just like, an understanding that it occurs like bill by bill. Like, you pull you pull that window to the left bill by bill. And I'm just sort of wondering what your mindset is when you're, as a listener. How do you, what's your mindset when you're trying to convince somebody of the bigger fish, I guess, to, to kind of boil it down?
Yeah, it's it's hard to pull out the words. For example,
Yeah, take your time. It's okay.
yeah, I went. I am a graduate of the New Hampshire Leadership Series, which
Mm-hmm.
is through the Institute on Disability, and one of our trainings is talking to legislators to sway them to vote for disability positive legislation. And in doing that, listening while trying to like persuade somebody to do something is tough.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also listen to, while you're saying, look at what is their body language? Why are they doing that? If you're talking to somebody about, wanting to have, I just keep using the, childcare with early intervention services, and you can see that they're just like, there's a lot of money in that you're talking, and it's out here. And for me, it's to try to break down that, like, stop thinking about the money for 8 seconds and think about how much you're actually spending for. I mean, so you're still thinking about the money, but you're thinking about it. Here's this service that we could combine, pool our resources for, so that 2 years down the road, we're not paying for 15 other services for, this hypothetical person
Mm-hmm.
or this hypothetical group. For me, I feel like that's something I do well with, is just explaining in a more like, here's how this is going to affect people. Here's how it could just be laid right out on the table. Like,
Yeah.
if we do this together, 10 years down the road, we're not going to have to be worrying about all of this, policing for these kids who didn't have the services that they need.
Yeah.
I'm going down a rabbit hole with that, but
Well, no, but it's, well, and that's like kind of the funny thing about it, right? Is that you can't. It's hard to, to the point. It's all connected. So you're always going down a rabbit hole every time you start to have the conversation, because there's no way to not explain this. It's, I don't. There's a number of people that I could attribute to pointing this out pretty constantly, that like it's all a related issue. And I think that, when I think about what you just sort of put forward in a more meta way, I guess, it's like, it's that it's arguing for humanity in a lot of ways, right? Like, it's making the argument that, or not even, it's just putting forward, hey, rather than thinking about this in terms of its fiscal, you know resiliency or availability or whatever. Like, you like, rather than thinking about this in terms of numbers, think about it in terms of people and use numbers as a means to understand the experiences of people directly. But if you start out with that data rather than starting out with the people, you're not going to apply any sense of humanity to the person that's actually missing out, right? Like, because they're just a statistic. Like, they're just the, like, and they're not even the explicitly, so they're usually, it's usually denoted by the percentage not represented in the statistic. Like, you'll get a majority and it's like, oh yeah, 88%, and it's like, okay, yeah, but what about that other 12%, dude? Like, that's a
Yeah, like
lot of
we're over
people.
here going like, what about us?
Right, like, that's a problem. And so, but it's like, and then you see the, like, a centrist argue, like, well, if you're not going to get 100% of what you want, then you're going to tank it. You'd rather get 0 than 70% of, like, even though you're arguing for 100. It's like, well, no, what we want is, we want to get the 70 or whatever it is, and then convince you to give us the other 30%, right? Like, we're going to talk it out of you. And that's, like, I mean, which is in a sense the argument for why somebody would, like, why we, on the left right now, despite the fact that we can't stand him, we say vote for Joe, because realistically it's easier to get what we want if we have him as a baseline than if we have 4 more years of a dumb wannabe fascist. So, like, but on a state level, it really is about, like, trying to take that sort of establishment Democrat who's really, like, mired in the look how far we've come thing, and saying, yeah, but how much does your history chalk with actual advancement of human understanding and human empathy and human rights? Like, how much, like, progress is cool, but it's kind of in a bubble.
Right.
So it's like trying to figure out a way to pop that bubble, I guess. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that.
I find that there's a lot of that. Look at what we've done. Like, great, wonderful. But yeah, look at what we haven't done yet. And not to be
Right.
on that pessimistic side, but look at what we could be doing.
Right.
Change it, change the wording. We do that a
Yeah.
lot.
No, exactly. And I think that's it. Is that's the idea, is to offer a replacement. That it's like, we don't come in and say no without offering something in exchange that's actually better, right? Like, and I hope folks genuinely understand how much easier their lives will be if there is actually just widespread accessibility to services for folks, especially for disabled folks. And that sort of gets me to the next question that I wanted to ask about. Because to me, oftentimes when like, the left can be very rhetorical in the way that we go about things, and we tend to seek brevity because the concern is that we need to quickly communicate the message, so we'll rattle off issues. And it feels sometimes to me, not all the time, like disability rights will get kind of tossed into that potpourri of other progressive or liberal issues, and doesn't necessarily get like that's a really weighty issue, and it doesn't necessarily get the attention it deserves. And when it comes to actually honoring the rights of disabled folks and the needs of disabled folks, especially those that don't necessarily present like immediately. So there are a lot of people who are on the autistic spectrum who you just can't tell immediately by looking at them, oh, that person experiences disability, or like, there are non-visible disabilities all the time. And even in progressive or liberal spaces, those people still face challenges and a lack of understanding or a lack of empathy. And it can be alienating or even ableist, or at the very least just unsympathetic. Why do you think it's so difficult for those progressive liberal spaces to reach a deeper understanding of such a broad issue? Like, we seem to be making it like making progress on things like racism and sexism in, you know, in a general sense. Obviously they're not solved, but there seems to be a lot of attention towards that, but it can be more difficult to have that conversation about disability. And I'm wondering, like, what's your take on that challenge? Why is there such an obstacle to that? Like, what is that antiquated idea that's still sort of stuck in folks' head that makes this thing so difficult to get
Yeah,
behind?
yeah, I totally. Yeah, so in the disability community, we kind of I don't know, just go with it. There's the saying like, until you've lived it, you don't know. And I think that there's a lot, so you can use that. That's great. But there's just a lot of ignorance around how we treat people with disabilities, how we've treated them in the past, and how going forward we need to rethink why why we why we have these biases, or why we have these ideas of, you know, what a disabled person should look like or sound like, or, you know, where they should be able to work. And I think for people who, you know, are definitely more open, and are, you know, willing to learn about themselves, you know, willing to look at themselves and say, all right, I have these racist things in my head that I've been hearing my whole life. Let me change this and work on this. And it's true, there's not a lot out there pushing for kind of breaking that down the silos. And I'm totally stealing this from Deb O. Deb Opramala. She said it this morning. We can work on many things. We don't just have to work on one progressive issue. We can add disability in there without it, you know, being its own separate thing that maybe we're afraid to touch. I feel like I just think maybe there's a lot of guilt out there. It's hard to address some of your inherent biases on, you know, what you think a person with disabilities should be doing. I guess that's my best answer for that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I think you're, I think you're right on. I mean, to me, I think about it in the context of how many people who are on the spectrum have been, you know, hurt or killed by police, right? Because that cop didn't understand that person was having a meltdown. You know, like, that really, that's something that deeply bothers me,
Mhm.
because I think it's something that um we don't we don't necessarily examine that part of it enough, that, like, that lack of understanding of that experience. And I think for a lot of, I think you're right, I think for a lot of people it comes down to a feeling of guilt, um and that lack of empathy. You know what I mean? Like having to confront one's own ignorance, or, you know, like, it's like having to deal with your internalized racism, kind of like, it's obviously different in many ways, but the underlying problem is kind of the same. Like, the underlying issue of lying to ourselves about self-righteousness, you know, like that type of, I'm not a racist, I'm not, I'm not a bigot, I don't have bias. And it's like, well, okay, sure, we are trying, but we're on a continuum and we don't always have a full understanding of stuff. And there's definitely an amount of, we need to, again, remember how not far we've come in terms of understanding and providing support for these communities. You know, if we're going to if if we're really going to make the meaningful change, we have to actually step into the shoes of people with disability and understand the problem. And I think that can be very difficult, again, for that like legislative numbers person who works in like a high octane type of space that, it's yeah, it can be really not conducive. You know what I mean? And and then there's part of me that's like, I think about questions like how accessible is even working in the state house for somebody who's on the spectrum. You know what I mean? Like, what's the physical experience of being on the floor with 400 other people doing that whole thing? Like, how we will sit here and we'll say, well, we want equal representation. It's like, okay, well, I want to see an equal amount of disabled people representing in 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 state legislatures and in the halls of power. Like, they there's it's just a intellectual difference. It's not like most of the time there's something that can be brought to the table. So I don't see a reason why we shouldn't be looking at more disabled candidates. But how often does that space alienate that person, or how much of that part of our population are we excluding just by simply not even considering, like, yeah, this is a really noisy room, and like you can't, you have to there's a certain dress code, and you'll get like shut out if you're not looking a certain way, or like there's all this crap, and it's like, who does that leave out? You know what I mean? I think, I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here at this point because
Yeah,
this issue
yeah.
bothers me. But what's your take? I guess like, do you have anything you want to add to that? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Especially like the accessibility issues of the State House. It's, I'll just throw out another personal example. My son and I went to for one of the early paid family medical leave hearings, and we were just in the hallway. My son is autistic, and I think we lasted about 8 minutes. Just because of the acoustics in the building, the noise of the people, it's a lot. It's a lot if you don't have any sort of sensory issue that's like making it feel like you're on a carnival ride. So for somebody to be able to then, I mean, my son would be perfectly capable of being a legislator. I mean, he's 12, but worthy of age. But because of those barriers, that could be a problem for him. And also, the dress code, because you can't wear sweatpants 24 hours a day.
right? Come on, man. Yeah, it was. I had a conversation with Carlos recently, and it got me on this idea of like, we need more wrinkly T-shirt politicians. Like, like we need more folks that can't afford fitted tees, like, like, give me that guy. Like, I want that guy. But yeah, no, seriously, I mean, I actually, I don't know, maybe I'm weird for thinking this, but I really would love to see a revolution in dress code in politics. Like, I think that could be like, that could change the game so much. Like,
It really could. When COVID first started, my husband and I had a spirited conversation about, I think it was Brooks Brothers closing, or one of those suit places. He's like, this is it, it's going down now, that we're at the end. And it's kind of like, yeah, that kind of works. Like, regular people, I don't know, growing up working class, you have this idea of like, oh my God, that person has a suit, they must be important, they must have money. And yeah. So yeah, I'm with you there.
no, I mean, like, well, that's so, I mean, that, like, that actually gets into an interesting thing for me though, right? Like, because it gets into power dynamics and symbolism. The idea, like, and this like this is a total tangent. I never like we definitely didn't discuss talking about this today, but um I genuinely, the reason I think that like it's so like it seems like a trivial issue to say we should change dress code in politics, or like we should welcome somebody wearing like a hoodie on CNN, or something to that effect. The reason I think that actually is a really good idea is because it breaks down the power dynamic and symbolism of like the suit. Um, that that's that's actually an aesthetic tool in a lot of ways that keeps us separated. Like it's a way of breaking us apart and not coming together, and also sort of appreciating authority, right? It's a way of sort of reinforcing authoritarian and like tendencies that we might have. Um, and that if my pitch is that if you take away the need for the suit, then you normalize the idea that any old person can be a legislator, and then you actually get much more representative government. Like that, it seems like it's such a trivial idea, but I really wonder just how much of an impact that could have. Like what's it like if we have people showing up to write law in their Nikes? Like I want to see that. I'm curious. So I don't know if you think like if you agree with that take. It seems kind of silly to me, but I wonder about like even just asking questions like that sometimes, if it's worth worth joking about.
Yeah, I talk a lot about it, you know, in my house because I haven't really gone anywhere in a while. But
Right, right.
I just think that if we can, like you said, kind of normalize these positions, um, how much better off are we going to be when
Mm-hmm.
you have people who are living these lives every day instead of somebody who's like, well, I'm retired now, I'm going to do this, and just talking like the history of our legislator really is, you know, people with money, people who are older, people who are retired. Yeah, if we could just have regular people in regular clothes, just
Yeah.
working on things together, I
Well,
think it would be so much better.
it reminds me of like what was it? I saw a clip from like where Anthony Anderson interviewed Corey Bush for one of the late shows, I think it was. And like at one point Anthony is just like he makes a comment about how he's so excited to see a black woman with tattoos and dreads the going to Washington, like seeing that representation. And that was just like it's of the same variety to me, that idea of like you want to see people that actually like, I want to see representation. Like I remember when I found out that like AOC had gotten a copy of Animal Crossing, it was just like, yes, finally we have real representation in our you know we're actually there. We've got you know people that just do regular stuff, going and actually making decisions, and are just, they're human and they experience stuff. And I think that's like helping to break down that idea of like what is political, even like what does political mean, even, like and the politicizing something is kind of just like in a lot of ways it's like a inflated way to dismiss an idea, like, oh, we're politicized. It's like, I'm not politicizing something, I'm telling you my experience, and that it
Yes.
matters, and there are other people like me that have the same experience and they matter. And it's just about trying to get something done for those folks. It's not about trying to take them and turn them into some sort of monolith or some sort of symbolic idea that we can play football with in debates. This really connects to real folks.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
So See, I'm sorry about this. I'm a total rambler. Like, I'll just go. I gotta really rein myself in. Um, so something that I think you this is a big point for you, and you've mentioned it already. Being a stay-at-home mom, um, home home experience and connection to family is clearly really important for you. And I think during COVID too. I mean, was literally just having a conversation with a friend of mine about this, like before I came in to do this interview, about how um, we've been able to refocus somewhat uh, our societal emphasis on what's important. And I think being stuck at home has made a lot of people see the value of like just being able to be at home and do stuff with their family and invest in that thing that they care about, and not so much just being focused on producing or earning or whatever, right? There's a certain amount of financial burden that was relieved, and we were able to inspect the way in which our labor was being really taken advantage of. And in your opinion, I guess, like, what is that societal value of spending time with your family and being focused on the home? What's the value to our psyche and society and community? And what is the value of changing that emphasis from just producing to focusing on what matters to us in our personal lives?
Yeah, for me, there's a lot. The way I kind of view what's happening with COVID, keeping people home and working together as a family, it's not easy, and some days are not great. But what what we've been seeing is that you don't have to go out, and being with your family doesn't mean you're going out and buying a boat, or showing off your trip to Disney for the 90th time. It's, I don't know, it can be about, hey, look, my kids and I made a fairy garden in the backyard, or you know whatever it is that you're doing. um, for me, I never planned to be a stay-at-home mom. I actually didn't know I was going to have didn't know if I would ever have kids. So that was, to have kids and then be a stay-at-home mom was not in my plan. um, so learning to just say, hey, I'm home, instead of saying I'm stuck at home, like, no, I get to be home with my family. I'm not just going through the motions in a workplace where I just want to hide from everybody all day. Like, you could do that if you're home. But it just, I think I'm hoping that this time has made people realize, like, we don't need to keep filling our lives up with stuff, and just working so that we can get that stuff to show off, how nice and green our lawn is, or whatever it is that people use as their status. Kind of outside of the mainstream of people, so I'm not really sure like what's cool right now, but it's, I feel like we need to just focus and say, hey, look, let's work on our families, and then we can see, like, our family is privileged, we have this. But my neighbor over here, they're still having to go to work every day. They don't even have somebody to watch their kid. How can I use what I have to help them? And I'm hoping, a it could just be crazy hope, but hoping that this time will make everybody aware of the fact that, like, if you can be home and you can do these things for your family, like, this is going to help everybody. um, Really just focus on where we're at, and what's important.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, like, it's just that it strikes me as like I wonder sometimes if it would be easier for us to approach explaining the value of progressive policy if we had, like, if we have that realignment. You know what I mean? Like, The practical example is, you know, how much does progressive policy seem to gain momentum in the current moment with everybody having to go through COVID and all of a sudden sort of seeing the cracks in what is economy even, you know what I mean? Like, what are we, like, what are we doing here, folks? You know, like, that, you know, a lot of what we actually deal with is inflated numbers, and it's like, you know, like the stock market itself, like how, a good portion of that is money that hasn't even been made yet, in a sense. Like it's the like that. I mean, that's even what futures is. It's just like playing bets on potential transactions that could occur, or the ultimate outcome of a market's, you know, potential earnings, right? Like it's make believe in a sense. And we are all going to work every day to do the labor that basically pays off that debt. Like we're doing that production, so we're sort of like in a lot of ways, like we're only serving the economy when we do that. We're not serving ourselves. If you were to take the, like, you know, as many free marketeers will like to say, it's like taking that, like the economic jungle or ecosystem, like it's its own organism that's existing like separately. That we're sort of the food and the fuel for that, right? Like our labor, like our effort, what we put in on the daily grind is that. And something like COVID comes along and completely disrupts that pattern, and all of a sudden we get to see just how, I guess, like how blatantly we're being taken advantage of, you know. And I think that gives us that opening to make that argument for, like, yeah, here's why we should, you know, come up with a new campaign for getting information out to folks. Like, how can we do mailers that list off services that you can get without, you know, without much effort at all from the state? You know, like, we have these programs. What are we doing to let people know that they exist? You know, how many potential aid programs could one get to with just adequate information? You know, I, like, personally, I won't, you know, recently I lost a job, and I went to try and deal with getting unemployment, and I literally didn't even understand how to get in touch with unemployment, and I thought I could do it through DHHS. And so I spent X amount of time not collecting unemployment because I didn't even know that I had gone to the wrong office. You know, it's like, it's stuff like that that's like, we don't even tell people how to do this. You know. But we will absolutely send them to work to make money for, you know, some hedged bet somewhere up in New York City. You know, like, it doesn't make sense to me. Um, and I think that refocus on family and home is, you know, whether we expect it or not. You know, obviously, you, as you said, you didn't plan for it, but I mean, I would imagine that, and you know, maybe this is presumptive, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like having that unexpected experience could have helped contribute to learning a value that you might not have had you not had that experience, about what focusing on the immediate is and not needing to strive for the next big thing.
Yeah, I definitely did. Throughout the early times when I first became a stay-at-home mother, again, I hate that term. Anyways,
I
not the
know.
point.
I know. I know it's
um,
rough. Like,
I was I had attempted a few times in between there to restart my own business doing hair, and every time it would start to get going, I would remember why I'm like, oh yeah, I can't do this because I have, you know, these 2-year-olds who need, you know, they need me every second of the day. I can't be tending to a whiny bride who doesn't like her hairdo, when I think it would be more important to be at home with my kid who is totally struggling right now with everything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I lost my train of thought there, but for me, yeah, it's just, again, was not something I planned for, but in the end, I feel like it's really, I don't know, I feel like it was kind of meant to happen. And here I am now, I'm able to run for office, which,
Right.
I
Well,
remember being like a seventh grader thinking, that's so cool, I want to do that.
yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, holy crap, I am doing it. So,
Right, right. Well, I mean, I think it shows that like we never know where something will bring us. I guess is the um, and that oftentimes like what I think maybe what it comes down is to re-understand like reconfiguring our understanding of what satisfaction is, right? Like what brings us satisfaction or a feeling of wholeness or completeness in our lives, um, and that what we may think initially is what we want or what we're striving for, we just through the process of trying to get there and having things tear it down, you might find that a new path opens up that may seem like it's less satisfying at first, but it actually gives you something far more gratifying later down the line. Um, and that there's a certain amount of like, you got to go with the flow, like just accept it as it comes, as hard as that can be. Um, but, but also to remember that those experiences like make us unique, right? Like we're, so often I feel like we get wrapped up into this idea of like icon, like being an icon, being like a celebrity or a focal point, right? Like that happens with politics, it happens with entertainment, and it happens with, I mean, you pick it, like everybody's getting a million followers or whatever, and getting popular on the internet, what have you, and like the competition, who can go viral, and it seems like there's so much attention paid to that, and it's like we are all that without the attention anyways. Like everybody can be and is that person already. And breaking through having to spend some more time at home and connecting with your family, sometimes you can see like the amount of change that you can make is actually like you can do a whole lot more right in front of you than you can if you're like, oh well, I'm gonna become you know a real like the most famous hairdresser in the region, or the most famous podcaster in the region, or whatever it is, right? Like maybe that's not as important as just like, hey, how can I help like my neighbor understand that like they're getting screwed over on their property taxes right now, like
exactly.
like sometimes that's the bigger, more heroic action, you know what I mean? Like it's not like all of that can be peripheral change, but if you look back at the end of the day, focusing on that immediate is how we really make that meaningful change that progressives always want to push for. um, so there's part of me that wonders if like we should be grateful for the pandemic, in the sense that it gave us the disruption that we may have needed to communicate uh, not just the economic struggles, but like the societal life struggles that we're experiencing. um, I don't know. Again,
Yeah.
I'm ranting. You're a member of the Southern New Hampshire DSA, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Cool. So it's like it's nice to talk to DSA members, because I know that there is a direct connection to labor within that movement, and I always think that that's a really key component to the the math and understanding what labor and productivity is, and finding a way to identify and allot enough time for the personal life of the worker. So, um, I mean, is that something that you guys find you emphasize within DSA meetings and stuff like that? Do you tend to take that approach? Like, I'm always, I talked to Hannah last week, and I'm always excited to talk to other DSA members and be like, what's y'all's plan? Like, I'm so curious.
I'm like, oh my God, I call myself a garbage DSA member because I have not attended as many meetings as I should. I try, um, but it's that ideology of just, we need to make that space for the worker to be a person and to have their own life. That's what drew me to the DSA to begin with. I come from a family of people who have always worked, and I've been working since I was 15. So I don't, it's just one of those things. I'm totally, totally focused on, working people are making this country move, and it's not, I don't know, it's time to start giving these people, giving us, what we need, instead of saying, here's something, take this, it'll be good enough for you for right now.
Right. Well,
Like, here's 2 weeks vacation, you'll be good with that. Or here's 2 days vacation, or you don't get one, depends on where you are.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's, I think it's, economics is kind of the great equalizer. Um, and, and, and furthermore, like, labor can speak for itself. Like, there's always this, it's, like, the few know the best for the many type of ideas that I always just think is such bullshit. Like, it's it's just ridiculous. Like, workers are actually quite intelligent, and oftentimes have don't necessarily need to read the book that explains the problem because they live the problem. And it's not necessarily that, like I think that the trouble that workers experience oftentimes is, like, they'll have this lived experience that they then don't necessarily have the adequate language to describe the problem or the predicament that they're in. Like, it can be like, um that happened to me for a long time, where before really kind of like diving into understanding more about what politics from a labor perspective was, um, I'd I'd feel really frustrated because I'd feel like I'd be getting screwed over, but I wouldn't know how to talk about it. And I feel like that's intentional, like, that's like not knowing how to discuss labor rights is a feature, not a bug of the system. Um, like, talking to a friend the other day, and this goes back into why it's important to invest in education. But talking to a friend the other day about high school government classes and high school economics classes, and literally being told capitalism is good. That's why we have what we have. Like, capitalism makes it possible for you to do this. And, like, remembering back to, like, being taught what communism was, and it was like, I think there was like a student in the class that had like a bunch of pens, and my teacher walked over and just grabbed like the bundle of pens and was like, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna give a pen to everybody, and that's communism. And it was just like, oh, okay, guys, like, but I didn't, I'm like in ninth grade, I'm like a freshman in high school, like, I had never, and my teacher was a really intimidating dude. So how was I going to know to question that? And the experience was generally pretty similar across the board. So it's
Yeah.
like, when that's what you're given in your formative years, when your brain is really like still pretty malleable to information, you're going to get somewhere with it. That's what we're telling folks. Like, how do we expect them to have the language to describe the oppression that they're feeling in the workplace, to like, where they literally have that lived experience, But at the same time, all they can remember when they're trying to think about the problem is like, well, yeah, but capitalism is good. Like this is, I just got to work harder. But we don't actually live in a meritocracy. Like that's not true, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and I it's frustrating. So I mean, I think, and I again, I think it gets back to that interconnected nature, like of of generally being able to support issues because you need to have the baseline, and maybe that gets me to something more specific. What kind of programs would you like to see, like if you were to spitball an idea, what kind of program would you like to see occur that we like that seems more or less like low hanging fruit, legislatively speaking? um, what kind of thing would you like to see happen, like that maybe hasn't been put forward yet, or has but could have been better? um, I, I might be asking a very nebulous and difficult question to respond to, but I always wonder from people who are running, I'm like, what kind of legislation are you kicking around in your head, if you get there, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. So this is super, like, I can super specify this one. Uh, and forgive me, my dates, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but
totally
um,
cool.
a while back it was passed that insurance companies needed to cover certain therapies for kids with autism, or for folks with autism, but it was specifically, I believe, on the kids' insurance.
Mhm.
Um, and that's great. It's awesome. It made a huge difference for my family, except that it had a limit that was kind of useless. The coverage that it provided for it covered maybe like 2 months of services.
Wow.
So 2 months and your kid's cured. Good, move on. You're done. And again, with all great intentions, this law was passed, and it was great for some people. Really benefited from it. And then I believe there was a little bit more added to that law to make it more feasible for people to access. But for me, I think it needs more. We want to take care of people in our community. That's the biggest push with disability rights is, everyone deserves to be out in the community.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're only providing for a small amount of services that will help them get there, it's never going to happen.
Right.
How are we going to achieve this great dream of like, we're going to have this society full of all kinds of people, but we know that they need supports to get there. We're not giving them. So for me, that would be something like, kind of low hanging, like
Mm-hmm.
we just need to make the law, change. Why are we only funding this amount of services?
Right.
Especially, it's,
No,
I always,
I hear
I
you.
always steer off the course and say, but if we had Medicare for all, however,
Right. Yeah. Of
so
course.
I'm not going to go down that.
No. No. Definitely. No. I mean, I'm with you. I think like obviously Medicare for all is just. I think that's the basic necessity, right? Like we need that, and so something I do want to ask about, because you kind of alluded to it there, and where are you at on trying to increase availability for testing diagnostic processes for uh, adults? It's so often, so often we think about diagnosing being on the spectrum as something that happens when you're a kid, but we're also learning that there's a whole like, if you look at someone, if you hear someone explain what the autism spectrum is, they say, well, it's not really like it's not like black to white, it's more like a color wheel. And so that's a fairly, like, that idea, that type of representation of what autism is gaining popularity now, like, or it's getting more exposure now. Like the community itself is pushing that way of messaging what spectrum means out in spaces more. And what I think it shows is that there are a lot of people that basically just went undetected for honestly all of human time up until now, because in all likelihood we've had people who are autistic the whole time, and they just never were diagnosed. I mean, many of the greatest thinkers, people speculate about actually being on the spectrum. So it's like there's a component of we could totally be like, what percentage of those people are homeless people? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, what percentage, like, what kind of services should we be looking at um, to increase availability for testing and aid for adults, so that we can try and sort of bring in people that have historically been alienated? Where are you at on that part of the issue?
So totally, I think our services for adults who experience disability are not great across the board. Um, we need to be able to identify folks who, like you said, were not able to be diagnosed at a younger age because, people were just not doing it. They weren't acknowledging the fact that, perhaps somebody's struggling, but there could be an underlying reason. So I am absolutely for expanding our services. In terms of like mental health, it takes, for diagnosing a condition for diagnose, say autism, you need to go through they have pretty intense testing, a neuropsychological exam. I'm not sure what else they're doing now. But we need to make it as part of mental health care, perhaps, because I know as an adult who I constantly question, like, oh, am I doing that because maybe I have autism? And not in a way like it's a bad thing. I just can totally correlate the things that I do with what I've read. So I think we need to start making this something that isn't like, I don't know, it's like somebody hanging the golden ticket in front of you, but they keep moving it back, because, we're going to have mental health care, we're going to have this, but to get at it, it's impossible, because we don't have enough direct support people, we don't have enough mental health care people. So I think we need to work on just making it a priority to have adult services that are, affordable and accessible for people.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think I mean, it's right on the money, you know. I just, like, it just breaks my heart to think about the amount of people that have gone through some sort of self-diagnosis process. You know what I mean? And then furthermore, your point about, like, it's not even a bad thing, but it's like just through your own process of learning, you're like learning things about yourself. And I know so many folks that have gone to doctors and tried to, be like, well, I look up this thing, and it's like the whole stop searching WebMD argument. And it's just like, yeah, totally. There's hypochondriacs in the world. I get it. And it's not healthy to just like dive deep on medical issues all the time. But the fact of the matter is, how, like, there a lot of folks that are getting late life diagnosis for autism are getting it because they did just search. They just looked it up. They're like looking at, like, they're like, well, geez, what the hell is wrong with me? Like, why am I finding myself in this position? Or like, why is this such a challenge? And like looking up, like, oh, wait a minute, like, that's there's this social convention, and like this is ridiculous. Like, why do people do this? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then it's like, oh, okay, it has to do with someone's unique experience, and it's really unfortunate that folks have to find out that way. That, and then have to go through some sort of weird gaslighting process where they have to convince their doctor to honor their research, or to like, no, I know myself well enough to know that I'm not lying right now. Like, it gets you into this weird psychological debate with your primary care or whoever when you're trying to negotiate getting a referral. Like, even like if you've got an annoying primary care, sometimes like that could be a huge obstacle for you. And not to mention just even being able to get in the door, like if you're someone who experiences homelessness. So, that's that type of thing is really just, it's to me, it's very unreasonable that we don't consider this more. I think obviously Medicare for all would be great, but your point about wrapping it into a broader type of a mental health, like, we just need to be there for it, and we shouldn't be constantly waving it around as something that we say we care about but then not investing in it. Like, just put the money there. It's not that hard. Like, yeah, I don't know, it's, to me, it's a little ridiculous that we don't just fund stuff, but what do I know, right? Like,
Who am I?
yeah, who am I even? So well, we'll wrap up here in a moment, but I just, like, last, I just want to ask, like, how you feeling about your race? Like, how's, what's your general mood and vibe going into the primary coming up very soon?
Yeah, I realized yesterday that it's a lot shorter distance between now and the primary than it was when I signed up in June. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. I've been not out talking to people because that's, you can't. But I've been doing a ton of mailings, doing some phone banking, talking to a lot of answering machines because nobody answers their phone. But I feel good about where I'm at. I've had some people that I've never met within the city say, "Hey, I voted for you," which is really exciting. So people, my name's out there. I've been here for 8 years. I'm running for the floterial position. So it covers Ward 4, 5, 6, and 7. And I'm a former Ward 6 person. My kids go to school in that ward. So I don't know, I'm feeling good. I'm really, really looking forward to the 8th and what comes after it.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited that we had a chance to speak today, and, good luck. Definitely. You're clearly, it's nice to have someone who's right there on the issues and advocating for this stuff. I think it's important to send folks that have experiences like yours to the State House, and to really be pushing for this side of progressive policy and legislation, and having that unique lived experience going into it. It's just, it is really hard to overstate the value, in my opinion, of having that lived experience in the room with a little bit of power making things happen. So good luck, and I look forward to just talking more with you, and I'm sure we'll have you back at some point. And yeah, thank you so much, Marcella. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome. I've had a really great time.
Cool. Well, you have a really pleasant day. Take care. Enjoy yourself. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Take care, Marcella. All right, everybody. That was Marcella Termini. She's running for district, I believe it was, let's see here, 43, District 43, Manchester Floterial, for awards 4, 5, 6, and 7. That was a very cool interview. It's always nice to hear some more information and ideas about this particular set of folks in our society that don't necessarily get the lift up that they need all the time. So just, yeah, good luck to Marcella. That was great. So I did want to just sort of say today was a bit more active in our chat, and Nicole Klein Knight hopped in, just pointed out, in addition to the discussion about wearing clothes, wearing like altering dress code or acceptance of dress code in the legislature. Nicole Klein Knight brings up a point. Also, what if a non-binary gender person wants to wear nice clothing but not meant for their birth sex? I think that's a great point to bring up. Boom. Super high level importance. Like, really, excuse me, I can't understate just how much something like that would change the dynamics fundamentally, and actually provide more acceptance for a group of diverse folks. And Nicole also points out that there are so many disabled legislators, they just don't talk about it. I think that is a very, very interesting point that's come up, and I'd like to pursue that more. So hopefully that's something that we can discuss more on the channel. And with that, I think we're gonna cap the show off for today. See, we'll be back tomorrow doing a local show. There's a whole bunch of Peterborough nonsense to get into. It's going to be very first panel show, so we're going to see how that goes. Might be a little less aesthetically pleasing than normal because Zoom is not my best friend, and I'd love to find a better way to operate, but until I can get something a little bit more substantial going, this is where we're at. So anyways, yeah, tomorrow's show, local, with Zach Green, Anna McGinnis, and Jonah Wheeler. We're going to be just discussing recent resignation of Karen Hatcher from the Peterborough Select Board, talking about what's going to be happening following that up. Undoubtedly, we'll end up discussing the round 2 of the pro-police protests, which I like, the pro-police rally, Blue Lives Matter rally that's going to be happening in Peterborough this coming Saturday. So we'll probably discuss a little bit ahead of that. And Jonah and I are planning to do another episode of Deep Dive. I know we took some time off, but we've got that coming in this week, and got some other interviews kind of getting set up now, so those will probably come through within the next week or so. And yeah, that's them updates. Obviously, if you wrong side, go to patreon.com/locally sourced. You can become a financial supporter of this channel. Don't do ads, as anybody can tell by watching the videos. We have no ads, we have no fiscal sponsors or anything like that. This channel is completely supported by small contributions to the Patreon. So if you care about this programming, if you care about the content of this channel, please consider throwing $5 a month to lift this up. You can obviously contribute more if you feel like it's worth more to you, but I try to not ask a whole lot for it, because I know that, especially during this time of economic struggle, not everybody's got the capital to make it happen. But I do know that for free on a almost weekly basis, you get 2 interviews long form interview podcasts in video form. And we've got the deep dive segment now with Jonah, and that's just detailed looks at broader issues that we're dealing with, where we try to relate it on a local level and on a theory level, and just trying to synthesize all that stuff. So it's like this is hours of content a week, and there's a lot there. There's a wealth of information that's come from the interviews. I really encourage people to go back, watch our interview, the interview I did with Paul Kuno Booth, interview I did with Ivy Van, talking about anything from just how our local journalists look at covering stories to why it's so difficult to get anything done in the State House. This is there are some really important ideas that have been floated out here in these interviews. Um, you know, going all the way back to the first Zoom interview I did with Josie Pinto, talking about how to understand working with people that we disagree with. I mean, this is huge stuff. So, folks, please, consider becoming a patron. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and out here doing it, making it happen. And much love to you, folks. So I want everybody to have a nice afternoon. Back tomorrow, rocking and rolling. See y'all then, folks.